Alright, in this episode of the Man Cave, really quick vid on how to rebuild a brake caliper for the DRZ400sm. Now in a previous video, I showed you guys how to completely disassemble the rear end of the DRZ. We got into removing the swing arm, servicing those bearings and pivots, cleaning up that rear suspension. Now along the way, of course, I noticed that the brake caliper in the rear was in pretty poor condition. It's what's technically known as a crusty shit pile, so I decided to give it the full treatment, took it completely apart, and got it prettied up. Got some powder coating done. Looked online for a spare part kit which will replace my caliper piston seals, a few other rubber bits, and a few nuts and bolts along the way. Now we're going to get this back to brand new condition, and I'll show you how it's done. Now before actually removing and disassembling the whole caliper, I actually used the brake pedal to pump out the brake piston as far as it would go without actually completely popping out. This way it would be a lot easier to actually remove the piston from the caliper body. Now with that brake piston ready to come out, I hooked up my caliper to a soft-jawed vise and attached a vacuum bleeder on there just to drain the old brake fluid out. Use something to get a grip on that piston. Make sure you use a little bit of rubber, an old rag or something to protect that piston from getting scratched by whatever you use to grip it. Make sure you don't put any scratches on that. Don't put any dings or sharp edges, because that's what will eventually tear into your new piston seals when you assemble it. Inspect that piston and make sure that the finish is still clean. Give it a bit of a clean with some steel wool. Don't use any rough sandpaper on that. Keep it nice and smooth and clean. Now you'll want to pay particular attention to the grooves where the O-rings sit inside the caliper body. It tends to build up a lot of grime and a lot of dirt. Make sure you clean that out well. Fine steel wool is probably the best thing to use in there. Don't use any sandpaper. Don't deform that groove. It has to be nice and square so that the new O-rings fit in there quite snugly. Alright, with the caliper body all clean and my spare parts in, I am ready to reassemble and rebuild this rear caliper for my DRZ. Get your ducks all in a row. Make sure you have all your equipment and bits and pieces close at hand, and I'll show you how it's done. We're going to be attaching our brake caliper to the carrier itself. It went on this way and there were some rubber bits on there. Now I cleaned up all these old rubber bits right over here, but the new kit actually comes with replacement parts for these right over here, so we're going to be using these new parts. Okay, a word about working on brakes and calipers. You want to use red brake grease. Alright, now you don't want to use regular grease because it's petroleum based and it causes rubber parts like these and your new caliper seals, or piston caliper piston seals I should say, to swell and sort of lose their shape and harden up. So you don't want to use petroleum based grease. So try and get your hands on some of this red brake grease, which is a pretty important part of getting this set up right. So I'm applying a little bit of grease to this area here where I will have this piece come on. I'm gonna add a little bit of grease to that too so that it slides on easily. So make sure it's nice and snug. Now this piece here could prove to be a little bit of a challenge. I'm gonna get some grease on that. It was actually a bit of a pain to pull this out of the brake caliper, and I'm hoping that it won't be too hard to get it reinstalled back in. Boom. All right. Okay, let's wipe that off. So that piece, all our rubber bits are back in the caliper and the carrier. Now, of course, these rubber sections, of course, flex and actually give the caliper a little bit of float as they sort of, I don't know, move over imperfections on that rear disc. So it actually is a little bit of a floating caliper. So this piece was actually greased up and it came from here. So I'm gonna put that back. Now right before I get to the end of that, I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite, just a little dab of Loctite on there. I want to make sure these pieces stay in place, particularly for brake components. You want to make sure that they stay in place. A little bit of Loctite doesn't go astray. So I'm locking that down. Now this piece actually sat inside that, yeah, and this lined up with this rubber spacer over here. So that went in there, that went in there, and we had this bolt over here come through and secure that area down there. So again, this area was also heavily greased, so I'm going to be adding a little bit of grease to that. Put this down. Alright, again I'm going to put a dab of Loctite just to make sure things stay in place. Just going to give that a quick hit with the impact. And that's that. Now, as you can see, that caliper has quite a bit of float. I don't know if you can see that. It's got quite a bit of float on it, and that means that everything is moving as it should. So we're going to turn our attention now to some of the other bits that came with our kit, namely the main pin for the brake pads. Now, it's this area here that you need to watch out for if you reuse your old main pin. It does get rusty, it does get crusty, and basically your brake pads move across those as they open and close. So your brake pads are actually sort of moving on that. So if this is rusty or sort of rough, your brake pads won't get good movement moving across. So luckily, the kit that we got online actually comes with a new pin for our brake pads. So it's nice and clean, nice and smooth, and you can be pretty sure that these brake pads are going to be moving pretty smoothly across that. Okay, also included, of course, in our kit are the piston seals. Now the piston seals fit into that little groove that you see here on the inside. I don't know if you can get a good view of it. All right, it's got a thick one and a thin one on top. Now this is where it's extra important that you have this red grease. Now a lot of old school mechanics will say, oh, just use brake fluid. Yeah, you could, but then again, if you've got the red grease, why use something, you know, go ahead and use something that's actually meant for the job. So we're gonna get these reinstalled. We'll start with the wider one, which goes lower. So these are going in. They sit inside a groove inside the caliper body. All right, now we've got both our piston seals sitting inside there, 1, 2, and these are greased up and ready to go. All right, now it's time to put in our piston, or caliper piston. Now make sure you inspect this and check that it doesn't have any scratches or dings or rusty spots on there. You want a nice clean surface, and you're just gonna be putting that inside here, and it should just slide past those new seals. I think we got it. All right, so that's gone all the way in. So our new piston seals are now holding our caliper piston in place. All right, now I've reinstalled the rotor guard. I've got my bleed screw in there and my banjo bolt, along with a couple of new fresh crush washers, ready to accept the brake hose when I install. All that's left now are these spring clips, which go into the caliper like this. They sort of clip in. That one. This area here with the groove or the dip should sort of line up with where your brake pad pin goes through. So this is just about ready. We're just going to line up our new brake pads. Now they fit into that little indent that you see over here. So one on either side. There you go. Now our brake pin is lightly greased. We've also got a little bit of grease on the back of the brake pad that makes contact with the piston just to avoid any brake squeal. So we're pushing this pin through our brake pads underneath the spring clip retainer. And that's just going to thread through. We've already got a little bit of thread locker on there, and we're just going to snug that down. Check our alignment. That's looking good. That looks sweet. All right, now take a look at that. Our caliper is rebuilt, and I think it looks pretty dang good. I'm not gonna be shy. I'm gonna call that like brand new condition, maybe even better than brand new. You don't even get the black powder coat with a brand new caliper. So that is our caliper rebuild. Tune in for the next episode when we put together the rear end of our DRZ400sm. Hope you guys learned something new right here on the Man Cave.